I moved into apartment 302 of the Phuong Hong apartment complex, an old and cheap building located in the heart of the city. The room was not large, but it was clean and well-equipped. However, there was a large mirror in the bathroom that the previous landlord had left behind. This mirror was unremarkable except for its size, which made the space feel larger. But there was something strange about it. I didn't think much of it, it was just another piece of furniture she had to use. On the first night after I took a shower and looked into the mirror, she felt something change in the atmosphere. It was as if a cold breeze had passed behind her, but when she turned around, nothing was there. She thought it was just her imagination, that she was stressed from moving, so she didn't think much about it. However, as the night went on, she began to feel more and more uneasy. Occasionally, she would hear a faint tapping sound, as if someone was gently touching the glass. It wasn't a loud noise, just a few soft taps like whispers in the night. Mai tried to reassure herself that it was just an old building. Maybe the walls cracked and the wind blew through, but she couldn't shake the feeling of dread. On the second night, Mai was standing in front of the mirror, brushing her teeth, a nightly routine. Suddenly, when she looked into the mirror, her reflection seemed slightly different. Mai saw her eyes blink slower than usual. She quickly turned around, but nothing had changed. Her reflection was still standing there, just like before. Yet, a strange feeling rose within Mai. She couldn't explain it. It was just a brief moment, but it was enough to make her start doubting what she had seen. Unable to stand the uncertainty, Mai decided to place a small camera in the bathroom, recording all night to see if anything unusual would happen. The next night, when she went to sleep, the camera recorded something she couldn't believe. The mirror began to move. Her reflection started to change, as though it had a life of its own. She saw her reflection not just standing still, but also moving, the eyes shifting, the figure stepping out of the frame. Mai was stunned by what she witnessed. The reflection in the mirror was no longer just hers, it had become something disjointed and unnatural. She quickly jumped out of bed, her heart racing. Mai watched the video again. Every night, her reflection became more unexplainable. It no longer looked exactly like her. The eyes in the mirror started to show clear differences. The eyes no longer just stared at her, but sometimes they seemed to follow her when she turned her back. I couldn't make sense of it. She tried calling her friends and family, but no one could help. By this point, Mai started to doubt her sanity, but the feeling of fear didn't subside. The nights grew worse, and each time she looked into the mirror, her reflection became stranger. One night, while she was asleep, Mai woke up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling. She got up and walked toward the mirror in the bathroom. When she got close, she saw her reflection standing still, staring at her. But the odd thing was that the reflection smiled, even though Mai wasn't smiling. This terrifying sensation made her feel like something had taken over her from the inside. She quickly turned away and ran out of the bathroom, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave her. The following nights, her reflection became even less like her. Mai refused to look into the mirror anymore. She felt as though a different entity was now living in it, replacing her. She tried to call her family and friends, but when they came to visit, Mai was no longer the same. She didn't speak, just sat there quietly, not reacting to anyone. This condition lasted for a few days, and eventually Mai was taken to a psychiatric hospital. Doctors diagnosed her with acute dissociative disorder, likely due to extreme stress. However, no one believed her stories about the mirror and the strange images she had seen. She only spoke of a different entity in the mirror, and how if you looked too long, that entity would replace you. 3 days later, while Mai was still in the hospital, a child playing near the old Phuong Hong complex found the mirror and touched it. The child reported that when it looked into the mirror, it saw someone who resembled it but wasn't it. And the person in the mirror whispered, "Come play with me." No one could explain this phenomenon. All they knew was that the mirror was no ordinary object. It seemed to contain a dark presence that could replace human souls. The story of the mirror spread quickly. An anonymous voice recording began circulating on forums and social media, warning people, if you see yourself in the mirror, but it smiles when you're not, or blinks slower than you, don't look any longer. It will start to replace you. These words spread rapidly, causing panic and fear. Mai slowly recovered and was discharged from the hospital. However, she was no longer the person everyone had known. She didn't remember the strange events that had occurred. But one thing was clear, Mai no longer dared to look into the mirror. Every time she stood in front of it, a feeling of unease would rise. Someone in the mirror was still watching her, and she couldn't escape it. One day, Mai happened to hear another story about someone who had gone through a similar experience. The story said that when the person looked into the mirror, another entity had taken over their soul and pushed them out of this world. The story of the mirror that reflected another person slowly became an urban legend, with warnings that if you looked into the mirror for too long one day, you would realize that you had been replaced. And if you are watching this story tonight, don't look into the mirror behind you, because maybe it is watching you. Min was a young man living in the city, where the noise and bustle created a rhythm that never stopped. However, within this hustle, Min always sought quiet moments, the hidden corners that people often overlooked. One evening, while walking home, Min accidentally turned into a small street he had never noticed before. This street was different from all the others in the city. It was silent and eerily empty. The houses were old and dilapidated, with no one in sight, creating an atmosphere that felt both heavy and mysterious. Though the street was unremarkable, it held something special that Min couldn't resist. At the end of the street stood an old house that, at first glance, seemed normal, but there was something about it that captivated him. The windows were broken, the roof was falling apart. Yet the strangest thing was that despite the house being abandoned, the front door was slightly ajar, as if inviting someone to enter. A strange pull kept Min coming back. He knew he shouldn't, but the odd attraction of the house was too strong to ignore. At first, Min simply stood at a distance, but after passing by a few times, he felt a strange connection to the house. One day, unable to resist any longer, he decided to step inside. As soon as he entered, an overwhelming chill filled the air, as though the house was waiting for him. The space inside was dusty and musty, and a foul smell overwhelmed him. But Min couldn't stop himself. His curiosity pushed him further into the house. The deeper he went, the more the eerie silence settled around him. There was no sound except for his footsteps. Suddenly, Min noticed a large crack in the floor that stretched across the room. Strangely, from under the crack, faint sounds could be heard, whispering voices, too soft to make out but undeniably there. Min tried to ignore them, but the strange sensation refused to leave him. He approached the crack, and when he placed his hand over it, a cold gust of air shot up from beneath, sending chills down his spine. Looking down, he felt as though something or someone was pulling him deeper into the ground. The tension was unbearable, yet Min couldn't stop. He bent over, peering down into the crack, and the whispers became louder, clearer, almost like someone was calling his name. He tried to ignore the feeling, but the pull was becoming irresistible. That night, Min couldn't sleep. The strange sounds from the house still echoed in his mind, haunting him like a ghost he couldn't shake off. The anxiety and unease clung to him, making him feel like he was being followed. In his sleep, Min found himself back in the house again, walking into the room with the crack in the floor. This time, though, there was more than just sound. In his dream, Min saw a shadowy figure pass across the floor. The figure was strange, not fully clear, but Min could feel its cold presence. He tried to turn away, but it was as if some invisible force kept him rooted in place. The more he moved toward the crack, the louder the whispers became, more frantic and desperate. He felt like he was being pulled into a dark vortex, unable to escape. When Min looked down, a dim, eerie blue light began to glow from beneath the floor. He didn't know what it was, but it filled him with an unbearable sense of dread. He felt a crushing fear, like he was trapped in a nightmare with no escape. The dream became sharper, more vivid, until he saw a woman's figure emerging from the dark. A woman with long hair covering her face. Her eyes were black as night, and they seemed to bore into him, unblinking. The woman didn't speak, only stared at him with a malicious intensity. Min tried to run, but his feet were glued to the floor. It was as if some force was keeping him there, trapped in place. As he struggled to free himself, the woman's cold fingers touched his shoulder, pulling him closer to the ground. Before Min could comprehend what was happening, a powerful force yanked him downward. He felt himself being consumed by a black abyss, unable to see any light, unable to hear anything except the horrific sounds from below. He was being pulled deeper, farther, until everything around him plunged into complete darkness. The next day, Min woke up in his own room, but the uneasy feeling didn't leave him. He looked into the mirror and realized something was wrong. The reflection staring back at him wasn't entirely his. His image seemed faint, like a shadow not fully present. He began to panic, unsure of what was happening. Were the things he had experienced just dreams, or had something truly occurred in that house? The dreams about the house kept returning, and Min began to feel a strange, undeniable pull toward it. Each time he closed his eyes, he found himself back in the house, standing in the room with the crack in the floor. But this time, the whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were clear, speaking his name. Min couldn't resist. He returned to the house again. As he stepped inside, the cold atmosphere greeted him just like before. But this time, the crack in the floor was even wider, and the whispers were louder. He realized that the voices weren't just whispers. They were a voice calling him, urging him to come closer. Min could see the woman's figure again, but this time she was standing on the floor, emerging from the crack itself. Step by step, she moved toward him, her eyes black as pits, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. Min tried to back away, but his legs felt heavy, his feet stuck to the floor. He was trapped, unable to escape. The woman reached out, her fingers icy cold, and when they touched his shoulder, a sharp, burning pain shot through him. Min felt himself being pulled into the crack, deeper into the earth, where the darkness consumed him whole. In that moment, Min realized that he was no longer alive. The house had taken him, and his spirit was now bound to it, forever connected to the dark, whispering force that lurked beneath. The whispers no longer just haunted his dreams, they were his reality. Each night, he was drawn back to the house, forced to relive the moment of his own undoing. His body may have disappeared, but his soul remained trapped in the endless void beneath the old house. The people living near the street began to hear strange noises coming from the house. Faint whispers and the sound of footsteps echoed from the ground. The voodoo talismans of the old shaman, the fate of a deceiver. In a small village deep in the forest, the villagers lived in fear and superstition. They believed in mysterious things that no one could explain. Amid the gossip and strange tales, there was a man named Vu, known as the shaman. However, that title wasn't because Vu had any real mystical abilities, but because he was a clever fraud. Vu wasn't a real shaman. He didn't know how to commune with spirits, nor could he control the supernatural forces or the world of ghosts. But he understood human psychology and their deep superstitions. He knew that if he spoke of ghost stories, mentioned cursed spirits, and created talismans supposedly imbued with the souls of the dead, people would believe him without requiring proof of any sort. Vu had lived in the village for many years, but few knew of his origins. He always resided in an abandoned, gloomy house on the outskirts of the village. The villagers kept their distance, but whispered about the strange occurrences happening there. Despite having no special abilities, Vu easily deceived the villagers, selling talismans he created, profiting from their fear and superstition. The talismans Vu created were small figurines, often made of wood or clay, said to contain the souls of those who had died. He claimed that these talismans could protect families, bring peace, or even improve one's fortune, but they could also bring disaster if one didn't treat Vu with respect. These talismans became highly sought after by the villagers. Whenever someone encountered an unfortunate event, they would turn to Vu for help, asking him to create a talisman to protect them. Vu didn't just sell talismans, he also carefully constructed stories about vengeful spirits. He claimed that these spirits were souls of people who had died tragically, betrayed, or murdered. Unable to move on, they had been captured and trapped by Vu in his talismans, to be called upon whenever Vu needed them for his rituals. The villagers were terrified of Vu's words. They believed the talismans were their only protection from misfortune, and none dared to question him. Some families, when faced with misfortune, would come running to Vu, begging for his help. Vu had earned a fortune from selling these talismans and had gradually become a figure of power in the village, though in reality he was merely a deceiver. One day, Kwang, a man from the village, came to Vu. Kwang was a family man, living a relatively peaceful life. However, recently, he had been experiencing a series of strange events in his home. It all began on one particular night when Kwang heard knocking on his door while he and his family were fast asleep. After that, objects in the house were mysteriously moved, Despite Kwang being certain that no one had entered, Kwang began to feel afraid. Every night, strange noises kept him awake. The knocking on the door echoed through the silence of the night, and sometimes he heard faint whispers, as if someone were calling his name. Though he couldn't see anything, the fear was too much to bear. Desperate, Kwang decided to seek out Vu, having heard of the shaman's ability to exorcise evil spirits. He hoped Vu could help his family rid themselves of these strange occurrences. When Kwang arrived at Vu's house, the shaman greeted him with a cold smile as though he had been waiting for him. "You've come at the right time, Kwang," Vu said, his voice raspy. "Your house is haunted by vengeful spirits. I can help you, but you must pay a large sum for a protective talisman." Kwang didn't hesitate. His mind was overwhelmed by fear, and he agreed without question. Vu nodded, then went outside, returning with a small talisman wrapped in black cloth. "This talisman I've made will protect you and your family from these spirits, but you must keep it in place for 3 days and 3 nights without moving it. If you do, the spirits will return and bring disaster." Kwang, frightened and eager for relief, decided to follow Vu's instructions. After Vu left, Kwang placed the talisman in the living room as Vu had directed. That night, the strange noises seemed to vanish. Everything seemed peaceful again. But on the 3rd night, just as Kwang was about to sleep, he felt a strange change in the air. First, the door creaked open, followed by the sound of footsteps inside the house. Kwang quickly turned on the light, but the brightness didn't ease the discomfort. He stepped into the living room and saw the talisman glowing faintly, its light a pale blue as if it were alive. As Kwang approached, the talisman began to move, slowly rocking as if something invisible were controlling it. Kwang couldn't believe his eyes. Fear surged through him as he heard a quiet laugh coming from behind him. He spun around and saw Vu standing there, wearing a malicious grin. "You thought this talisman was for protection?" Vu sneered. "It's not to protect you, but to destroy you." Kwang realized in horror that he had been deceived. The talisman Vu had given him was not a protective charm, but a vessel containing the souls of the dead, souls that Vu had captured. These spirits, full of rage and hatred, were now free, and they were after Kwang. "You will pay for entering this game," Vu said, his eyes wild with madness. "Your soul will belong to me." Kwang felt an intense pull from the talisman, as if an invisible force was drawing him toward it. He couldn't move, his body frozen in place while the angry spirits surrounded him. The sounds of screams, whispers, and curses filled the air. Kwang struggled to break free, but it was impossible. Vu walked closer to Kwang, his voice cold and low. "Welcome to the world of the cursed souls. You will never escape." A cold, icy feeling consumed Kwang's body. His soul began to slip away from his physical form, drawn into the talisman. He could do nothing but feel the overwhelming pain as his consciousness faded into darkness. The next morning, when the villagers gathered near Vu's house, they found it abandoned. Vu was nowhere to be seen. The house stood empty, but the talisman remained. A heavy, oppressive atmosphere lingered, as if a curse still hung over the place. From then on, no one dared to approach Vu's house. The villagers only had whispers of the story of a shaman who had deceived them all and the heavy price they paid for their superstitions.